Hello, my name's Tim Malone, and I have a YouTube channel of my history lectures. I was a history teacher for a long time. And this is an introduction to another one, kind of different from the ones that are up on my channel now. This is the tape of a lecture that I gave at the Mays Bookstore in Rockford, Illinois on June 15th, 2024. It was a lecture on the topic of fascism, which I think is rather topical right now. I think I say this in the lecture, but let me repeat it. I taught American history at Elgin Community College for 23 years. Mostly the surveys, first half of American history and the second half of American history. And as far as I know, I'm the only American history teacher who taught a full unit in the second half class on fascism in American history, because I thought that it was pertinent, and I got an opportunity to hang a lecture on the persona of Adolf Hitler, who I discovered in my teaching career was the most famous man in history. I never had a student in 25 years of teaching, thousands of students, who didn't know who Adolf Hitler was. I had students who didn't know who Abraham Lincoln was, who didn't know who Franklin Delano Roosevelt was, but they all knew Hitler. So I used that peg to teach about fascism, to teach about Depression-era America. So I gave a lecture on fascism in June of 2024. And I'm going to put that up in my lecture channel on YouTube. And I hope you enjoy it.
All right. Everybody, let's give Tim Malone a big welcome.
Thank you. Is that okay? Can you hear me? Okay. My name's Tim Malone, and I'm a history teacher, or I was. I retired in 2019 from teaching at Elgin Community College in Elgin, where I taught American history for 25 years. And there I went and did it again, 23 years. I'd like to round that up, but it was 23 years. And I loved my job. I just loved it. He taught survey classes at Elgin and something called American Civilization, and then a local history class. And I didn't think it was work. I enjoyed it immensely. And I went to NIU for my master's degree. I was ABD for my dissertation, all but dissertation I never finished. I lost interest in my topic. Damn, that book's out there somewhere still, isn't it? And I got into the teaching end of it, and that scratched my history itch. So I never finished, but still, I'm a historian. And I like to talk up history. History, it's very important history is. And I probably should do one of these on the topic of history. But today we're going to talk about fascism. Fascism, it's much in the news, but then it's my entire lifetime, it's always been kind of in the news. Fascism. It's a political ideology. And it's a conceptual muddle, all right? Everybody seems to agree that it's a conceptual muddle. It's a definitional muddle. Primarily because the question is, who is or who has been a fascist? Because, of course, Mussolini and Hitler, what we call interwar fascism, that's one type. We're going to talk about all different kinds of very confusing types of fascism. The typology for fascism is a muddle. And it's been driving me crazy now for about a month trying to get ready for this. And I don't know what to say about it in terms of, well, Malone, give me a definition. No, it doesn't work like that. Fascism doesn't work like that. You know it when you see it? I don't even know if it works like that. Perhaps the first thing to note about the word fascist is that it is highly contentious, usually used as an insult, and a definitional muddle. Recently, both President Joe Biden and his likely opponent in the November election, Donald Trump, have used the term to describe each other. Have you noticed that? They're calling each other fascists. Now, is that possible?
They're both right. Excuse me?
Well, that wipes the slate clean, right? That it be so simple. At least after my inspection of it over the last month or so, that it be so simple. Everybody. Well, no, of course not. Not communists, right? Fascism was founded by Benito Mussolini in Italy to oppose communism. And they killed each other in sight for a long time. Fascists and communists. But there's no communists left, are there? Well, there's North Korea. But he, Kim Jong-un, what's he called? A fascist, right? So not surprisingly, there are a lot of scholars of fascism. No, not a lot. You run into this a lot. Stop using the damn word altogether. Stop it. It's only used as an insult, right? Everybody's calling everybody else a fascist. Just get some whiteout. Whiteout, you remember that? Just steady myself here. A few years after World War II, George Orwell wrote that, quote, the word fascism has now no meaning except insofar as it signifies something not desirable. But historically, fascism, the word and the political concept are unavoidable, I think. You can't, no. We have to deal with it because it's out there. It's being used. Can we salvage anything meaningful from the use of the word? Why? Why is it historically unavoidable? There he is. Now again, I taught for a long time American history at Elgin Community College. And thousands of students. And I'd ask them, you know, and this is the only guy that every single one of them I ever had knew. This is the only man that every student that I ever had knew who he was. They didn't know Abraham Lincoln. They didn't know Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Everybody knows him. Everybody. Is there anybody in here who doesn't know who that is? No, of course not. The most famous human of all time. I'm trying to be provocative, right? This is why we can't do away with the term fascism, because of him. And because everybody knows him. Why? Evil sells. I mean, boy, I don't know what that says about us as human beings, you know. When you talk about fascism, you can get pretty pessimistic about us as a species and as a nation, as a world. The most important thing to know about Adolf Hitler, arguably the most famous person in history, is that he was a fascist. This is what I told my students, and I should mention that I was the only American history teacher that I ever knew of who did a complete unit in American history on fascism. I have over 30 American history textbooks at home, different ones. They'd send them to me free, trying to solicit my business as an instructor. A lot of them, they don't mention the term fascism or fascist at all. The words are not in the American history textbook. Some of them, once, to describe, I guess, who we were fighting in part of World War II, missing from American history, pretty much. I did an entire unit on it. Well, because I was in a position where I could teach things I was interested in myself, but also because I became convinced of Robert O. Paxton, a scholar of fascism, who said, and we'll come back to Paxton, he said that fascism lurks in the shadows of liberal democracies. Always. It's always there. Despite my American history textbooks and their lack of coverage of it. I don't know, what do you think? Because we're a liberal democracy, aren't we? Would we still fall into that category? We're going to talk about some of this typology as we go along, and then it's confusing. It's going to get confusing. I'm confused, and I've been at this for like 6 weeks, getting ready for this, and tearing my hair out. And usually, I can sleep 12, 15 hours a day if it comes down to it. And I was tossing, turning in bed some nights, like, what the hell am I going to tell these people that's going to make any sense at all? Because this is such a confusing concept. Hitler was the leader of a mass political movement, a fascist movement. What's more important historically, the leader or the movement? That's a perennial question, isn't it, in history? So what do you think? No Hitler, no Nazis? Well, we can't answer that question here right now, right? But see, I'm sort of edges towards the movement. The movement creates the leader. I tend to go with the movement, but it's a tough call, right? How dependent is and again, we're going to talk about this, fascism by most accounts has to be a mass movement. Now, what percentage of a population has to support a political movement for it to be mass? It sure doesn't have to be 100%, right? How much? 7? I don't know. See, I just asked a question I don't have an answer to. I don't know. My notion is 25, 30%?
I've heard that if you want a revolution, it only takes about 7%. So that's
For your movement.
for that, if they were looking for a revolution. Yeah.
So less than my 25%. Because they say 25 to 30% of the German people were members of the Nazi Party. Now, in a communist party, it's more like 10% are members of the party. But in fascist states, Italy and Germany, the traditional interwar fascist states, it was more like 25 to 30%. The cult of the leader. That comes back and back and back. But, and I don't know what to think about that either. I don't know what to think about any of this. The cult of the leader. And it certainly is true that Italian fascism did not survive Mussolini. Now, Allied armies might have had something to do with that too, right? And German fascism did not survive Hitler, but again, the Red Army was in Berlin. The cult of the leader. Hitler is the poster boy for psychohistory. Ooh, I kind of like that. I don't know, should it be hyphenated? That is the application of the insights of psychology to the study of history. Hitler is the most psychoanalyzed person in history. Now again, if you go down this path, and I think it's worth doing, right? Thinking about our leaders. Are all leaders of mass political movements psychos? No. You can be psychologically normal and be president of the United States, can't you? Again, we're talking about the relationship between the leader and the movement. He had Parkinson's. Is that it? Consideration of Hitler brings up the problem of evil in the study of history. Is evil a proper category in the study of history?
Who determines what's evil?
Well, that's exactly what I'm driving at here. Did Hitler think he was evil? Of course not. Now, what?
He thought he was the good guy.
Exactly. But let's talk about villains or evildoers in our media. Did the Joker know he was evil? Yes. In our media, most of the bad guys know they're bad and love it. That's not right. That's not the right way to frame that evil, is it? Evil people, real evil people, do not think they're evil. So, should historians in history talk about good and evil? Again, it's a conundrum, but it's yes, right? No? As a historian, I should stay away from the word evil. Yes?
No.
Now, see, you know, I'm not a religious man. You know, I was raised Catholic. I still remember quite a bit of that. A sacrament is an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. Catechism. But I don't know. I'm disquieted by the notion that history can't make value judgments on good and evil. Although I'm somewhat sympathetic to the idea that it shouldn't. Oh, here's an article, Trivializing Hitler. The new refrain, Adolf Hitler, we hardly knew you. And it says here, in his 1998 book, Explaining History, the journalist and essayist Ron Rosenblum wrote that the long quest for historians, philosophers, and others to understand Hitler has involved a trek into the trackless realm of Hitler's inwardness. It is a realm camouflaged by the thickets of conflicts, evidence, he continued, a tangled undergrowth of unreliable memory and testimony. And he talks here about that CBS did a TV show about Hitler back in the late 90s, about the young Hitler, and then this is about focusing on his youth and on his painting may obscure the essential evil of a demonical dictator. Now, I don't know if that show was ever, there was controversy here that you shouldn't do a movie or a TV show about young Hitler because it might make him a sympathetic figure. Because his dad beat him up, I guess. And he had other elements of a bad childhood. So that bad childhood excuse for Hitler, don't even go there. I don't know. I don't know about this either, talk about trivializing Hitler. It's kind of cute, but, you know. While Hitler is the poster boy for fascism, he was not the first fascist. That honor belongs to Benito Mussolini, the Italian leader, 22 to 45. Hitler openly emulated Mussolini. Mussolini claimed that his fascism, he invented the word, was something brand new. Mussolini said, don't look for historical antecedents to my fascism. It's brand new. Something new. And some historians have said, yes, it's a new type of nationalism, a new type of ultranationalism. And Hitler emulated Mussolini. After Hitler came to power in 1933, he went to Rome and, here's the man, he said. Here's my man, Benito Mussolini, the inventor of fascism. There he is. And there they are, together. Now, we're going to talk about this. Some historians say that fascism, that's it. That's it. Close the book. Only two. It was brand new with Mussolini, and it ended with them in 1945, and that's it. Don't go looking for fascists or fascism anywhere else ever. That's it. These two. Not even Franco was a fascist, according to some historians. Even though, of course, these two won the Civil War for Franco in Spain. Hitler and Mussolini, for sure fascists, but just them? Some scholars think so. Quote, the dean of Italian historians of fascism, Renzo De Felice, always insisted that it was wrong to apply the term fascist to anything but the movement founded by Mussolini in 1919. Even movements that openly modeled themselves on fascism, like Hitler's brown shirts, Franco's Phalange, were, he felt, something different. But most scholars say that fascism became the template for many right-wing movements whose affinities are impossible to ignore. That's Alexander Steele in an article in 2003. Affinities. So, fascistic affinities. That's what we're looking for. I kind of like that. Fascistic affinities. Fascism is a very controversial and complex topic. Excuse me. However, most historians agree that some of the main characteristics of fascism are extreme, militant, single-minded nationalism. Thus, fascism is a modern phenomenon. You have to have nation-states to have fascism. The pharaoh in Egypt is not a fascist. It's a modern phenomenon, modernity, right? When do things become modern? Industrial Revolution? Late 1700s? 1800s? Ultranationalism. Fascism is extremely social Darwinistic. Strong and weak. That's what it is to a fascist. And what happens to the weak? They're eliminated. Oh man, I say that right now. Yeah. What's the matter with me? That strong and weak business that resonates, doesn't it, in human beings? You know, there's something wrong with us. I mean, do you know that? Now, me, I remain pretty optimistic. Let me rephrase that. Fascism is human nature. That's why it's so popular, or that's why it lurks. I don't know. You know, again, fascism, and I'm with the people who say this. There has to have a mass political component to it. And earlier we were talking about what percentage of a population has to be in the party, followers of the leader, for it to be a mass movement. So now, like Pinochet's Chile, military coups, Pinochet never had a mass political party behind him. So he's not a fascist, he's a military dictatorship. You have to have a mass political movement. And that means, again, I said 25-30%, because that's what was in the Nazi Party in Germany, members of the party. It's also, fascism is a combination of social classes. But I think its heart is in the middle class and lower middle class. But it's a trans class. The mass movement has a trans class, and the fascists preach that. Doesn't matter whether you're rich or middle or work in a factory or a farmer. You know, it doesn't matter. You can be in the party because we're all for Germany. You know, we're all for Italy. Fascism is a species of nationalism, the most important ism of them all, nationalism. Ultranationalism is organic, anti-liberal, tribal nationalism. That's a fellow named Griffin. Ultranationalism. Fascism is ultranationalistic. So what's that? Ultranationalism is organic. What does that mean? It's not a foreign implant. Fascism arises from within the nation. The myths, the values, the history of the nation. It's organic. It's not foreign.
Do you feel that has to do with its xenophobic nature?
Sure, that's well, of course. You know that you're the in group and everybody else. Anti-liberal, tribal nationalism. That's ultranationalism. Because we're all nationalists, aren't we? I should do one of these on nationalism, another convoluted, confusing concept, nationalism. You're all nationalists, aren't you? Well, maybe not. Well, I am too, I think, you know. I mean, there's good nationalism and bad nationalism, and fascism's bad nationalism, gone to an extreme. The enemy within, round them up, put them in the camps.
Don't we have a different view, though, this time, because it's globalism versus nationalism at this time?
Right, and originally it was globalism versus regionalism, and there's still some of that. So it's ultra-nationalistic, it's dictatorial. The form of government in a fascist state is dictatorship, a single-party state. Again, we're back to the cult of the leader. And again, let me just say, we all want a strong leader, don't we? To lead us out of the wilderness? Don't we? Aren't we all?
At what cost, though?
Well, I mean, of course, but I'm just saying that in our evolution as a species, we've wanted to follow the leader. We've wanted to abdicate our responsibilities to a leader. It's in us. It's an instinct. Again, that's... So Max Hastings, you know, the English historian and newspaper man, wrote a book, Armageddon, about the last year of World War II. And in it he says that he thinks that in like November and December of 1944, the Russians are in Warsaw, the Allies are at the Rhine, right? That Hitler would have won a free and fair election in Germany. Explain that. They're running over the cliff, right? There's something. I only took one psychology class in college, and all I remember are Rats in the Maze and Skinner boxes, but there's something going on there, isn't there? When people will rush to their deaths because some, in Hitler's case, right? Well, Mussolini too. I don't know. Most of them, it's because some dunce says charge the machine guns. Yes, leader. I mean, I don't know. Fascism is reactionary and romantic. The glory age is in the past. MAGA, right? Make America Great Again. That might be the most compelling evidence we have that we're involved with a form of fascism right now. The golden age is in the past. We've degenerated. We're corrupt, right? We have to resuscitate America. Things are going downhill, and we need a strong, decisive leader to pull us out of the nosedive. It's romantic. It's reactionary, of course, looking in the past, and it's romantic. It's not rational. Fascism is emotional. It's not rational. We'll come back to this. Again, the cult of the leader. Fascism is militaristic, the cult of violence. It's imperialistic. Although some regimes were called fascist didn't attack their neighbors. A lot of them do. There's the old bromide, fascism means war. Social Darwinism, national Darwinism. The strong and the weak. Oh, here's some more definitional stuff. Merriam-Webster's, a political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts the nation and race above the individual and that stands for centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. That's a pretty good sentence. Fascism may be defined as a form of political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, an obsession with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood, and by compensatory cults of unity, energy, and purity, in which a mass-based party of committed nationalist militants working in uneasy but effective collaboration with traditional elites, abandons democratic liberties and pursues with redemptive violence and without ethical or legal restraints goals of internalized cleansing and external expansion. That's Paxson, Robert O. Paxson. Again, that's just a hell of a sentence, isn't it? God, man, as a historian, every so often I run across these kick-ass sentences, and I'm like, God, why not me? Why didn't I write that? You know, Paxson further defines fascism's essence as a sense of overwhelming crisis beyond traditional solutions. Belief one's group is the victim, justifying any action without legal or moral limits. Need for authority by a natural leader above the law, relying on the superiority of his instincts. The leader, he doesn't have to have arguments. He doesn't have to have points. He's plugged in to the
emotions of the people that are following.
that, right? Here's another from Paxson. Fascism is a malady of failed democracies. There can be no authentic fascism before democracy or outside of societies whose citizens are deeply engaged in mass politics. There's the mass politics thing again. Now Paxson, this is him. Other historians don't say it. He says you only get fascism in failed democracies and democracies that gave up on democracy willingly, that went to the polls and voted their democracy out of existence. Now, I used to say to my classes, I'd say, you guys would never go to the polls and vote for somebody who said, vote for me and there'll never be another election. You wouldn't do that, would you? I'd say to my classes. No, of course not.
But lack of participating in voting, we consider.
No, but that's what happened in Germany in 1933. The German people, not an uneducated lot, went to the polls and voted for a guy who was pretty much guaranteed not to have another election. Now, would you guys do that? No, there's nobody in here said they would do that. Would you go to the polls and vote for a candidate who said, vote for me and there will never be another election? Now, Paxson said so I don't know, Italy and Germany? I don't know. I'm trying to think. Fascism is a product of working constitutional systems which gave up voluntarily. Working constitutional systems that gave up on democracy voluntarily. Fascism emerges from crisis. The aftermath of World War I and the Great Depression in the 20s and 30s, for interwar fascism. The United States was in terrible disarray at the end of the George W. Bush presidency. One unnecessary war, two failed wars, a severe economic recession, almost a depression, and much that has happened since is still thought of as recovery from those events. That's Paxson again, about 20 years ago. Crisis. Now, of course, Hitler was elected in Germany via the system. And 4 years after the crash, stock market crash. Now, the Trump phenomenon is, well, if we say 2015, we arrived on the scene. It was 8 years, 7 years after the Great Recession. So now, nobody talks about the Great Recession anymore, do they? And yet, the suspicion historically is that the Trump phenomenon is related to the Great Recession. Just as Hitler's rise was related to the Great Depression. And there was a fascist movement in the United States after the Great Depression. So crisis. Now, is the United States in crisis right now? Hello, I'm back with an addendum to the video of the lecture I gave at the Mays Bookstore on fascism in June of 2024. I didn't get through all the slides on my PowerPoint, at that event. So I want to add. Now, a lot of this is going to be somewhat repetitious, but repetition is part of education. And so let me begin. The Italian scholar Emilio de Felice attempted a synthetic definition of fascism in a book in 2008, The Struggle for Modernity, Nationalism, Fascism, and Futurism. Fascism is, according to de Felice, a mass movement that combines different socioeconomic classes, that's key, which sees itself as having a mission of national regeneration, is in a state of war with its adversaries, and seeks a monopoly of power by using terror, parliamentary tactics, fascist work within the democratic system, and compromise to create a new regime destroying democracy. Again, we talked about this during the lecture. According to Paxson and de Felice, fascism is a malady of failed democracies. You have to have a democracy. And again, that's a difficult word. I should probably do a lecture in this series on democracy. That's another word that's very, very complicated and complex. Other characteristics that most scholars include in definitions of fascism: the dominant role of a charismatic leader. Now, when historians make points on a topic, they usually try to put the most important point first. And when I taught fascism throughout the years, I had ultra-nationalistic. Fascism is a version of nationalism. Nationalism. I should do a lecture on that word too, nationalism. And sort of simplistically for right here and now, there's good nationalism, because we're all nationalists, aren't we? I mean, I'm a nationalist. There's good nationalism that has been a part of the progress of our species, Homo sapiens. Nationalism has played a role in the fact that there's now 8 billion of us, and that large percentages of those people live a life that people from 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago could not imagine in terms of health and prosperity and contentment. Fascism is a bad version of nationalism. That's why we talked about the fact that it's a modern phenomenon. You have to have nation states to have fascism. It's bad nationalism, ultra-nationalism, ultra-nationalistic, tribal nationalism, belligerent nationalism, racist nationalism, fascism. But now, since the Trump phenomenon, since this version of fascism, and I'm not going to apologize for calling Trumpism a version of fascism, that's my belief as a historian. This version of fascism surprised the hell out of me. Trumpism jumped out of the shadows. I didn't see it coming. Bad on me. Now, when I think about the characteristics of fascism, the cult of the leader is now number one on my list. What's fascism? Fascism is a movement that participates in the cult of the leader. And again, I might have mentioned this during the taped lecture. It's hard to imagine German fascism, interwar German fascism, Hitler, without Hitler. And indeed, German fascism did not survive the demise of Hitler. Of course, Russian and American and British armies had something to do with that too. Italian fascism did not survive Mussolini. It's one of the weaknesses of fascism. The cult of the leader. The appeal to emotion and myth rather than reason. Fascism is not reasonable. Therefore, it's not scientific. It's not rational. It's emotional. And that sort of plays in with the cult of the leader aspect of it, right? And the idea that there's a man elevated above everyone else that you literally charge the machine guns for, you literally run over the cliff for, if he says so, is emotional. The tie of the leader to his followers is emotional. It's not reasonable. Therefore, you get Hitlers and Mussolinis and Trumps, hardly the intellectual leaders of their time. And the glorification of violence. As I said in the lecture, fascism is very social Darwinistic. The strong are meant to rule the weak. And the weak, wow, some fascist regimes lined them up and gassed them, the so-called weak. It's the law of the jungle, fascism. Now, maybe the word fascism, a very abused word, I grant you that. I guess I'm involved in an effort to try to rehabilitate the word, to make it usable. Would benefit from modifiers. You modify the word. Clarifies things. Here are some of the modifiers I've seen. Paleo-fascism. That means the first, Mussolini. Interwar fascism, Hitler and Mussolini. And again, De Felice thinks that those are the only two fascist regimes. Don't talk about Orban or Trump or anybody else. Don't talk about Pinochet in Chile. They're not fascists. There's only ever two fascists, Hitler and Mussolini. That's it. Now, I guess that would simplify our quest to define the term and to historically focus, but I don't know. No, there's fascists around today, and there's been fascists around ever since World War II. Traditional fascism, that's kind of the same thing as interwar fascism. Quasi-fascism, sort of. As most things, fascism is a spectrum, I think. Just like nationalism is a spectrum. Capitalism is a spectrum. Semi-fascism. Para-fascism. Neo-fascism. Oh, new fascism. Neo-fascism. I think you could use that term to describe Trumpism. It's a neo-fascist movement. Does this help or hurt to try to modify the word? Economic historian Brad DeLong likes the term neo-fascist for the Trump movement. Neo-fascism. Usually historians and political scientists say that commentators should avoid describing an ideology by what it is against. Fascism may be an exception. It's easier to get a grip on what fascism is by saying what it's against rather than what it's for. Fascism is anti-liberal democracy, anti-communism and socialism. In fact, it was invented by Mussolini in the 1920s to combat communism, which had come to power in Russia in 1917. And in fact, fascism and communism are like matter and antimatter. But now, of course, we have people describing the last communist on earth, the guy in North Korea, as a fascist. A communist fascist. As sort of a traditional historian, you know, I'm like, no. a fascist communist? No way. Even though the two regimes, communism and fascism, tend to govern in very similar ways. Police state, cult of the leader. They were mutually antagonistic. Anti-universal human rights. All men are not created equal to a fascist, far from it. Anti-globalism, again, nationalism. Put the walls up. You don't partake in trade treaties. You don't partake in mutual defense treaties. That's why, you know, Trump, he's a fascist. Why? Because he wants out of NATO. Because he wants out of our trade pacts with countries. Every country for itself is fascism. That he wanted to build a wall on the Mexican border, fascist. That's what a fascist does. Anti-science and rationalism, of course. And oh man, did we ever get that in spades during the COVID pandemic. Anti-science, the attacks on the scientists at the CDC, classic fascism. The experts don't know anything. The leader, our leader, knows all. I don't want to go into the COVID thing here right now, but there's people who should be held to account for thousands, literally thousands of unnecessary deaths in this country. The idea that the Trump fascist movement wants to deny federal money to any school that vaccinates children for anything. Smallpox, diphtheria, whooping cough, polio. That's anti-science. And anti-progressivism. Fascists want to go back. They're reactionary. The golden age is in the past. Now, I'm a progressive. I believe in progress. Tomorrow is going to be better. And that's what's been happening for several hundred years now, since the Industrial Revolution. Progressivism, I think, is demonstrably true. We're better off today than we were 200 years ago, 100 years ago. And I believe that's probably going to continue because knowledge builds on knowledge, right? Science builds on science. Technology builds on technology. That's the nature of the beast. I think it's hard to deny that we're worse off now in so many ways than we were 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Now, maybe that's just an opinion of mine. I don't know. But I think it's fairly obvious. And fascists want to take you back. They think the golden age was in the past. Let's go back. So it's anti-progressive. Now I want to say a word about fascism and racism. Most scholars of racism think that there can be a non-racist fascism, that the two don't necessarily have to connect, that you can have a non-racist fascism. An enemy within seems necessary, but that enemy doesn't have to be another race. Now again, I don't know about that. I think that luckily, nowadays, even a fascist can't be openly, rhetorically racist. So the racist aspect of fascism, which I tend to think is necessary, the racist aspect of fascism is in the closet. They would just as soon, fascists, be able to say the N-word, for example, but they can't yet. And I can't see the advanced democracies, the Western world, going back to African Americans sitting in the back of the bus and being lynched by lynch mobs. I just can't see that. Maybe I'm being naive. I don't know. I tend to think all fascists are racists, but again, there is this line of thought that not necessarily. I don't know about that. So those are the slides that I didn't get to in my lecture, and I thought I'd add them on here at the end. So again, fascism lurks in the shadows of democracy. It's always there, waiting for a crisis, whether real or manufactured crisis. So thanks for listening.